side of the discussion that we're going to have today.
All right. Well, I am sitting currently just a couple of miles in from Bethany Beach in southern Delaware, and currently helping women over 55 just dial in the signature work that they want to do. I'm talking to more and more women who want to kind of let go and trim the fat on things and cut the fluff and really dial into their primary signature work. So that has been a real joy of mine, and it kind of an evolution and a letting go of me trimming things where I had a digital agency, marketing agency prior, kind of just letting go. And so I feel one of my gifts is to really kind of in three key ways, like a catalyst to spark a flame in someone and kind of fan that flame, and then a conduit to hold space for them, and a connector, like where can they connect in the community? What platforms are they meant to be on? So I'm enjoying that after coming off of a year of um, difficult times of losing both my parents, and that kind of reorienting everything I'm doing and almost bringing me full circle back to the whole Kairos thing that began the conversation. So.
Well, Kairos, yes, you've said the word, and I'm sure that some of the audience may not have never even heard the word or even understand the concept. But since the day we're born, we understand what time is, what a clock is. It's time to eat, it's time for bed. And this clock governs all of our actions throughout the day in a linear fashion. It always clicks forward and moves that direction. And I thought that that was the only way that we could see and measure time. And I saw a graph one time or a graphic one time on the internet, and it said that there was a Kairos that was out there, was a whole nother way of measuring time. And the more I dug into it and understood where the language and the words actually came from, I started doing my research and did what most other human beings would do and go to YouTube and say, who out there can tell me more about this? And I found your TED Talk. And for me, that was and it was almost one of those where the universe sends a signal. You know, not only are you doing a talk on something I'm keenly interested and curious about, it said Wilmington TED Talks. I'm like, oh, if that's Wilmington, Delaware, I bet I can find this person. And you were gracious enough when I reached out to you to respond, and we did a webinar, and I brought some close friends in. And during that webinar, everyone cried copiously, and it was one of those beautiful things I'd ever sat through as a human being. I found it so transformative. And then, of course, as life does, my heart shattered when I realized I hadn't hit record. And that moment in time was encapsulated just in our memories of that conversation. So thank you again for coming back. And as you know, I've had record this time, so we're gonna jump into this here as well. But first of all, Donna, talk to me a little about your upbringing, and then kind of that transition point where you started to understand there are other cultures out there and how they view things.
Yeah, so I'm from a big Italian family, and so I grew up in Northeast Pennsylvania, a little town called Hazleton, and eventually off to college in Philadelphia, and eventually overseas, and landing in the Middle East, eventually in Nazareth, Israel. So in the course of that, of course, up to that point, I measured time like anyone, tick, tick, tick on the clock, Chronos, the whole thing. And while I lived there, I came across a book that talked about uh, Kairos and Chronos time. And then I started to realize, oh my goodness, this whole place I'm living in Nazareth. I lived in an Arabic community, and I lived there for 12 years among the most amazing people. And I talk about that in the TEDx talk. Um, I realized it was such another way of keeping time, of measuring time, where you weren't actually measuring time at all. You were spending time, almost suspending time, and then radically change as a result of that. And then watching the things that were transforming my life. So it began to orient. I mean, the cool thing about living in a place like Nazareth, especially as an American, um, I'd lived on the Israeli side and then I lived on the Arabic side. So I had Hebrew, Arabic, which was just such a gift to be able to do both those things, right? But I think to be able to be in a culture, but kind of be outside looking in at it, and then like learning and steeped in it, yielded to these amazing neighbors who like, we taught her what she knows kind of thing. who are teaching me Arabic and culture and everything. But then watching the whole way they spent time and the how community was, and just the way they looked after us. They didn't have to look after us. I mean, we're foreigners, right? But they just brought us in, and everything they were doing and experiencing, they made sure we had a seat at the table. It was just unbelievable. So that oriented my entire thinking for the rest of my life. It kind of made it very difficult when I came back to America. Re-entry was a whole lot harder than ever going in the first place, because now I smacked back into Chronos time. So I had this kind of suspension there in those years of living that Kairos kind of way, and then back here again and trying to hang on to that to the best I can. I can't say I succeed all the time, but it's definitely a quest.
It is. And I recall that there was a greeting that people would say, and it was that sort of, it was not only a hello, it was come in, it was a welcome, it was
Oh,
how's the house? It's not business. It was, can you discuss that? Because it was just even the simple language of welcoming you
right.
in.
So the first thing is ahlan wa sahlan, which means you come in. So it's this kind of welcome thing that Arabs do that is so inviting. And I had to learn, what was like now is a great time and now's not a great time, and kind of learn the nuances there, because they're going to welcome you, right? They're going to welcome you. But then there's a word, tafaddal was the word I shared in my TEDx. And tafaddali means you are preferred. And so that whole thing of like so other centric, so beautifully other centric. And then I think you might be referring to the whole thing on, ask about the neighbor before you ask about the house. Asal andejar abledar, which means, the house could be gold, but if the neighbors are terrible, kind of run for your life. The house could be a shack, but if the neighbors are gold, move in, because it's really the emphasis is on the people. And I may have shared this last time where, we say we saved the best for last, and they say we saved the last for the best. Like the whole thing is on, everything's on people. Like if you walk into a room, they're going to say "Nuarte dar," like you just lit up our house, you know. So learning all of that and seeing all of those beautiful things every time you give them something, yisalemu adeki, like your hands are blessed. It's this whole thing of really just seeing the person and service, giving, opening your door, welcoming people. It changed me forever. I'll never be the same. And it's a tribute to them, just for all that I learned on their watch. And like I said, it kind of, my sense of community is so heightened. Neighborliness is so different, that it made it very difficult to come back into something that was where people were siloed. Just everything was more chronos. That's when I wrote the TEDx talk. I said, like I cried for a year until I realized we weren't going back. And then I was like, wait a minute, we could do that here, like to the best of our ability. Let's gather around the table and let's do the thing. So, yeah, just that bridge that I've tried to build between all those beautiful things that I learned and to keep it consistent in my life.
Well, I mean that's a good thread to the next question then is what are those things? Again, I was raised in this world until recently, didn't even have an understanding that there was another way to do this. But someone for me who's becoming aware of this or just starting to experiment with it, if there are others out there that are curious, what are some things they can do? I mean, I love the concept of just the human being that's in front of you. That is the most important thing at this point in time, to bless that moment that you have together. So, I mean, what are some tips, but also what are some things to try to avoid that you've seen that, maybe are incongruent to thinking that way?
So I think the whole concept of the face of the person rather than the face of the clock. If I am present with you, really let all else be no to the best of our ability. And when we look at the way we do it, which is a challenge to us all. I mean, I'm sitting here, I've got two devices and I'm talking to you on one. So that's three, right? So that's kind of how we are. And I think when when you're willing to not jam everything back to back, that we almost leave no buffers. We leave no space to breathe. There's no grace or space. We're just kind of going from the next thing. Like how much can I get done in this day? Um, wow. So what if we looked at that? Like, how many people did I bless today? How many deep conversations did I have today? Who needed a touch from me? Or, are we actually seeing people? Are we just like flowing through life and everything's a blur? So I think part of that is slowing down. And this is a great interjection point for me to share the drink your coffee thing that I showed about earlier. Um, a couple of few years ago, we were up at my sister's, and my dad was wanting us to get in the car and head south back to Delaware. And I'm jabbering with my sisters, and of course, having a Kairos moment with my sisters. And and he's like, "Drink your coffee and stop looking around. Like, let's go." Well, as we fast forward, it's actually this coming week, that'll be the first anniversary of my dad's passing, where I had to take care of my mom. And I said, that drink your coffee and stop looking around was like a posthumous baton pass to me from my father, which helped me to understand this is the cup in my hands. This is the coffee in my cup. Don't look back. Don't look forward. Just be here. And it was those words, which he didn't mean it all at the time, that held me, which was a Kairos journey in itself of being with my mother and being fully present with her. So I think that's the thing. Like we're tugged from like, oh, that's the way it was. So we either want to return there, or that's what I'm trying to get to. And there's this continual tension and this underlying kind of current that's tugging at us to either be how we've been or be how we want to be. And I think Kairos is about just being here. Like, can I just be here? And I think when you're in a culture like that, there's no other, there's nothing else pulling, like you're not really drawn in that whole Kairos moment. You could have total plans, and if the whole family showed up on your doorstep, those plans are gone. This is what you're doing. These people are here. You're receiving them. Just a different way to live and experience time. So I think it would start almost like take a little, like even audit or take a little inventory. Like, what does a day look like? What does a week look like? What is, like, go retro and look back over your shoulder. I'm talking to myself here. Like, what would I need to re-examine to say, did I spend my days just chronos, like tick, tick, tick on the clock, 9:15, 9:30, 9:45, like, or did I, oh my gosh, is it 10:30 already? Like, have we been here just in this moment? And I think looking at that opens our eyes to what we're doing that is really um, clock driven rather than others driven.
Profound. I recall, I can't remember if you said it once or twice. You told a story about just the cooking environment over in Nazareth. Can you talk? Because I mean, just the verbal picture that you painted for me was just so magnificent, just capturing that moment. Can you talk a little bit about that? You know what I'm referring to?
There was the one thing about the coffee when I think the whole thing is that particular thing was about like learning, just shifting my mind from having to be the teacher, which means I meant to show up with all the things, and know all the things, to this yielded place of being the learner. And I love that quote by Eric Hoffer. In times of change, the learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped for a world that no longer exists. So as a learner, I was in a place of reception and openness. And I think as a firstborn daughter, where you're supposed to be in charge and um, I realized, okay, just open your hands and let that go, the control thing. Um, and just watched women teach me how to do it. So the compliment would be, your coffee tastes like Nadia's coffee. Or, that I was doing something that was akin to what they were doing was the most enormous compliment because it really allowed me to come and be mentored and tutored and everything from rolling my grape leaves was supposed to be the size of your finger and they're like yours looks like a cigar, do it again, you know what I mean? So those kinds of things, just looking at over my neighbor's shoulder, and I have this tattered book that I just, there were like half a teaspoon of this. So she's just grabbing cumin and grabbing cinnamon and grabbing whatever and throwing it in. And I'm trying to take these notes like so I could do it like her. But just the willingness to tuck me under their arm and, you know, just go ahead and bring me in with them. And then also including us. I may have shared this story before, where it's, I think, New Year's or something, and the neighbor's knocking on the door, and there's my family of five there. And basically, the neighbor is saying, well, come on and come over for dinner. I'm like, no, 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 that's, your family celebration. They're like, well, you're our family. Come on. If you knew how big this family's family is, huge, how they made that many more places for us at the table. Again, was just this sense of welcoming. I think we tend to insulate and isolate ourselves from some of that, and we miss it. We miss some of those beautiful moments because maybe we're afraid of what it'll cost us. That didn't even enter their consciousness ever. I remember when the Gulf War happened and Scud missiles are hitting the ground, the sirens are going wild. We know the war started, and there's my neighbor knocking on the door. Jana, our neighbor, the war started, wanting to make sure that we knew, get in your sealed room, put your gas mask on, the war started, right? So that kind of thing of looking after, of being responsible and mindful of others, I think is a very big part of this. You kind of can't live in individualism and isolation. Kairos means me and you, us, we, community. And I learned that on their watch. So,
Well, since you gave the TED Talk, and last time I checked, it had over 20,000 views. Congratulations on that.
thank you. Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, it was there. There was a lot that was said in there, and I'll put a link to the talk so folks can watch it later themselves. But after you've done that, what are some things that you would have added to that, phrased differently? What in reflection afterwards and the feedback you've gotten, what are some things that if you had to do a TED Talk too, that would be in there that you would really stress upon or not talk about as much?
Um, so when my son was born, we almost lost him. And um, it just so happened that there was a neonatologist who was a visiting doctor who helped that staff, and they saved Ryan's life. My neighbors tirelessly, they just crawled in with us. They just made sure we had food. They made sure that, my daughter Laura, who was, 2 at the time, she was being looked after. Like, just watching those neighbors come around us. And this is what I share in the TEDx talk, whether how everything was so familial and communal, like I said, everything from buying a couch to taking a wife. Like, what do we think? What are we going to do about it? Um, so I think, and I did talk about loss, how they would come and sit and it'd be days, sitting with one another. And so I think the thing that hits me the most is as a foreigner and an American, so let's be clear, there is that added, like, I'm not just a foreigner from any country, I'm a foreigner from the United States, which brings its own kind of thing with. They really just loved on us in a way. I mean, till now, where I am with these people, even on social media and everything, and connection and looking after asking after each other, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, these are lifelong friendships, and I think I would go back to that because I think right now, especially when the world is so upside down, and there's so many things happening, especially in Gaza and all of that, which is so heartbreaking. I think you know, I know another side of living in the Middle East that I think sometimes just doesn't get enough press. You know, I was I remember taking my friend with me once to visit Nazareth, and we sat in the formal living room, and it was pretty cold. You know, they didn't have the time a lot of space heaters in the house, and I said, so the woman went to Nadia went to make coffee, and I said to Pat, you know why we're sitting in here, right? And she's like, no. I said, because you're here. I said, if you weren't here, I'd be downstairs with the family. And eventually we talked Nadia into letting us go down with the family. But that whole welcoming and making sure that people are at the table, that they have a seat, they have a cup of coffee at the very least. I think they're the things that I would say, like when we've looked at something and we've already made up our mind about something, the way we see something, the lens we see through. I think it really helps to see a culture and a place in the world that is so seems, so war torn. How could you possibly be there or whatever? We know a different way. I mean, I would go out my house, out the front door of my house, and I lived on a cul-de-sac, and I happened to be there at a time when all the moms were having kids. So there were like, if you turned on that street by mistake, you could see people like, oh, I didn't just turn in here with 30 kids on little trikes in the street, right? And all the moms would come out in the afternoon. All the kids are riding their little bikes and trikes all around, and somebody's bringing out the coffee, and women are standing around. I mean, just the neighborliness and the connection. Now, I haven't been back to Nazareth in a while. Is it still like that? Exactly like that? I don't know. I can't say. But in the time that I spent there, I would want that to be understood, that it shaped my entire experience. I was overseas, non-resident American, for about 18 years. And, a big chunk of that was spent in Nazareth. And so, um, would want that to come forward as something that I lived, that they didn't have to do. There was it wasn't there was anything coming back to them from it. The beautiful thing is when I gave that TEDx talk, it was they had it live streamed, and my neighbors watched and told me they were crying and missing me and our family. But it did my heart so good to know that they could have that tribute out to the world in that venue.
Wow. It's beautiful. From a practicality standpoint, as we want to introduce more Kairos into our lives here in this world, are you building groups, structures, tribes, workshops? What are some things that we can really start? I mean, obviously appreciating the human that's there with you in the moment in time that you're there with that human is critical. What are some other things that you're working on, or at least in your neighborhood right now?
So as Sage Success Studio gets developed for women over 55, I think the whole concept of dialing that signature work is is really, it's legacy driven. What am I going to do that is going to outlive and outlast me? And I think there's that juxtaposition, especially in the entrepreneurial world, of the individual building an empire, out doing the thing. And I think what I'm seeing, especially as I talk to women, what a lonely ride that can be. And I think there are more women who are looking to work collaboratively and in community, in even co-working spaces. I think since COVID, so many of us ended up on computers and Zoom calls and things like that, just missing the camaraderie in the community. So what I'm really trying to build next is a more collaborative space, which also draws out the expertise of other women at this stage in their 50s and their 60s, who have much yet to offer. I always say I'm not my mom's 60, and I'm not my grandmom's 60. So I'm honored that I'll be 65 turning 65 in the coming year, and there are a lot of women like me who we're not done. I don't care how much the retirement things come in the mail and, we're not ready. We're not ready. And so I think that gives us the opportunity to really do things of great significance in this next stage of our lives, to find out what that signature thing is, what's that gift, and what's the God-given gift. And I always say that's your birthright, and then it's your birth responsibility to show up and give it out in the world. So really trying to build that more, where women will have greater opportunities to collaborate, not think they have to figure it out on their own. What a lonely ride. I mean, I still marvel over the fact that that's a thing, right? That we're trying to just do it alone. How much better it is when we work synergistically and we put our heads together, and my mind, your mind, what it's called, the third mind. I think that was Napoleon Hill, the mastermind, right? So how do we do that and all of us benefit? And that's the direction I'm trying to take Sage Success Studio: more co-working, more collaborative, tapping the expertise of others. I don't have to know all things. I don't have to personalize, personally brand something. This then allows us to live, a more Kairos kind of way of doing business, kind of sacred work in a way. What are you called to? And rather than the clamoring and tapping our fingers like what's next, is really say, like, enough grace, enough space. How are we doing this so that we do things that really matter? And we tap the expertise. I need something, you've got something, that I need. And the give receive thing, I think, is tremendous. So that's the direction I want to go there. Kind of, I'm finding the whole thing kind of coming full circle. So long ago that I lived in Nazareth that I can't thank you enough for reminding me. Yeah, right, Kairos. You know, just the fact that you have kept that conversation alive. I'm super grateful. But I feel like that's the direction I want to go. As who knows, maybe this is my swan song and this is the thing. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's the direction I want things to go.
You sound so balanced. That's a beautiful thing. Rach, I know you joined us a little bit late here. Thank you for coming in here. And Rach is my business partner in Superstruct, and someone whose brain I am so fascinated with. Everything she does, everything she says. It's very similar to you, Donna. It's just profound, and I don't have enough ink in my pen to write down all the things she says. But I want to bring her into this conversation. So, Rach, who are you? What do you do? Where are you? And what thoughts and comments do you have?
Donna, it's such a pleasure to meet you, and thanks, Andrew. And I feel the same way about your brain. Never can capture enough. Donna, I've been very excited about this chat. Andrew has been speaking very highly of you for a long time. But beyond that, there's something that just is very intriguing about this notion of time. We spend a lot of energy, I think, living in these systems that are broken and working our way through. And I just had a transformative experience in India last week. I have a 30-year-old son that I adopted. He's a Techstars kid who came to the States from India, and we went to his wedding. And while we were there, we had a chance to live in amongst this community, this idea of multiples as opposed to individuals. And so as you're talking, my entire body is back in that experience. It's a kibbutz, the way that my mother grew up, and the way that I have envisioned my life for my children, very much like rooted in something otherworldly than what we live today. So I appreciate the dialogue very much. I am based in Connecticut. Andrew and I know each other from Baltimore. 25 years ago, I lived in Baltimore and went to school there, stayed for about 12, and then moved on with my life to other places. But Baltimore, I always say to people, I'm really a salty Balti to the core. And I feel very rooted there. Interestingly, one of my closest girlfriends in Baltimore, her name is Elaine Isal, and she works at Gensler. And she comes from the same Arabic community in which you were living. So I've had a lot of experience listening to her talk about her history over the years. It's really interesting to have, I believe, to have grown up in that environment where you're in such a tug of war related to both religion, traditions, space. So it creates a different dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so glad you got to experience that in India. I mean, it's so life changing then. You're just not, you know, you're not going to be the same after that. It really kind of marks you for something else. Now you're going to see it through a different lens that you kind of can't unsee,
Yeah.
which then is something you kind of want to keep going toward, which is very cool. Love that.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Andrew and I have 6 different core areas of our taxonomy that we've been building out around the way that we think about growth in businesses. And one of those areas has been in the healthcare side. Agriculture and food are really deeply connected to that as well. Of course, like everything has a contributing factor to health. But when we think about healthcare, we've been thinking about it as an individual system because it has a GDP line, right? Like it's on our balance sheet. It's something that we have to spend as a nation. So when we look at how we could do it differently, the language that keeps coming up for us is collective health. And actually thinking about it in a system where you're supporting each other. And you see this, like the statistics are unfounded, but the people who are alone in recovery versus the people who are together in recovery. So that to me is just like where we need to live.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the whole thing is cultures like this do not have a concept of alone. I mean, I remember if I needed a day to myself, I would say to my husband, don't tell anybody I'm in here. Like he's going out the cul-de-sac, right? And I'm not in the car. Like, don't tell anybody I'm in here. Because I like want the day to myself. And it was like if when they find out I'm on my own, like you're by yourself, you know, like the whole concept of just you by yourself is it's just not a thing. I mean, and I'm sure people do have time on their own, but I just feel like that looking after one another and spending the time together and the we versus me, the we, not even versus we over me. There's the whole me thing is just not a thing.
It's not a thing.
It's just, you know, and then I come back and hit me again and Chronos again. And I'm sure even in your little, you know, your experience there, reentry, did you not find that like, oh my goodness, this is so different?
Well, it was so different. And like also just how we structure things like the even the stamping of the passport was so different in India than, and it was like this like male female lines all congregating, all coming apart, all coming together, all coming apart, this chaos that just felt like a really interesting balance. To me, it felt like chaos because it's not a system I understand. But when no one ever gets in an accident on an Indian highway. You know, they're just jetting across and zooming
Yeah,
around and everyone's all over the place. And I thought about that a lot. It's like everyone just kind of goes with the flow differently.
right, right.
And I think it's true like that. I lived in Guatemala for 6 years. I've traveled extensively all over Asia. And I think that's actually the point that we have systemized ourselves into positions where we've removed our power, our actual ability to be. And so when you talk about the me versus we, I actually look one step further at like the ecology and how we've no longer become really thoughtful tenants to the earth in which we're living. We're in opposition to it. So we're actually living on the earth as we intend to live on our own, with or without the earth being here and being present. I think that's the expansion to Mars, right? Like we can do anything. But in fact, the earth is really our interconnected life force. And we look at ourselves as like a totally different approach to the way that the systems could work. That's what I really gathered from India, that they're really thoughtfully thinking about how ecology plays a role in their survival.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, just the whole thing that seems like chaos. I think on a very micro scale. I grew up in an Italian family.
Really?
Moved to the Middle East, and I'm like, oh, I
But you
got
were Jewish.
no, I'm not Jewish.
Oh my God, I love that. Even
Yeah,
better.
I grew up in an Italian family. I get to Nazareth. Now, first I lived on the Israeli side and learned Hebrew, and then I moved to the Arabic side and learned Arabic. So I moved to this Arabic neighborhood, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I know this. All I need is the language, because the culture was my Mediterranean culture.
100%.
So, you know, I think the thing is that you know, kind of we're stripping away some of this stuff for I'm not sure why, for systems that in the end don't hold us and don't satisfy, because we totally crave connection as people. We really do. And as business owners, and I think as older women in particular, yeah, we're feeling that. We're feeling that distance and isolation and silos. And I think the more we can forge that, and that's the whole part of Sage Success Studio, where women who are aging, who almost age out of bringing their expertise. I'm like, oh no, like, come
It's
on,
the opposite.
yeah, let's instead of you trying to figure it out and you, let's just collaborate, build a collective, do something corporately. So kind of rising tides float all boats. Like, let's all go up rather than each one trying to, slog up the hill all by herself.
Love that.
Well, Rach, going back to what you said there, I've been ruminating on this. Back to that flow, the traffic flow, the chaos, but it's there's there are markers and guidelines that they all recognize and they all use, and part of that is not a rational thought. It's Kairos. They're living for the moment, the aperture. They're moving in that flow. And I think if we come back to the Western world where we are ruled chronologically, that influences that flow, that interrupts that flow. There is an inability for us to have that flow and hit that opportune moment, that right thing, hit the aperture the way it should. I don't, I mean, I just, as you said that, that was a thought that came to my mind was, my goodness, that's a real detriment to us societally, that we can't function in that form and fashion. So I appreciate you making that analogy up. That brought it
No,
home.
I think it was a nice pairing that you brought back. I feel like that's really true. Like I wonder, and I absolutely love, Donna, that you have an Italian background and you were living in the Middle East and you felt connected. And so some of that too is like, I don't know, just a familiarity that we've all been here before, right? There's something about that experience too. And that there's like just you think about your cellular walls, and this is I do a lot of therapy around cellular treatment, where you're just releasing old historic issues from your past that have been handed down generationally. And so there's a feeling like when you walk into an environment that you've been there before, that you actually understand it and you know that there is an inherent way that it works. And that to me feels like interesting as a US person in America. I never get that feeling. I just don't. There's no other worldliness here. It's like, and I do sometimes when I go into the woods, I'll feel like connected to other cultures or past lives or whatever, but not in the same way I feel when I'm overseas. Like definitely in India, like I got in the ground, I was like, I can breathe. Like I feel free in a way that I never felt before. I had a friend tell me that it was because the time zone shift and you're in opposition, right? So you're upside down. And so it's just an isolationist feeling because no one else is in your life is in the world at the time that you're up and moving. I don't know if I agree with that.
I don't know. I mean, I find it interesting. Like, here's my question. What are we afraid of?
Yeah,
You
what are
know,
we afraid of?
what are we afraid of? What are we afraid of? What will it cost us? Isn't the cost greater?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't the cost greater? And I think it's because we haven't really sat long enough, because we're on Chronos time. We haven't sat long enough to examine that enough. And I think of my daughter, my oldest daughter, growing up in Nazareth, playing in the street with everyone, right? Speaking Arabic fluently. And people are like, oh my gosh, look at that little girl. She looks just like a foreigner. They're like, she is a foreigner. American parents live right there. I mean, her Arabic, people would say, if you don't look at her, it's totally fluent. It's totally like all the other kids. To come back to here, if I think my reentry was tough, I look at Laura, who banged into a wall so hard coming into this culture in Chronos time. And so that wasn't a place of reception. That wasn't a place because there was a way we do things here. That's not like that. And then it makes me ponder, like, why not? What are we afraid of? Because the first thing my mother said when she got to Nazareth to visit, oh my gosh, this reminds me of an old Italian neighborhood back in Philadelphia.
Interesting.
So talk about be somewhere before. It's not like that's not sitting somewhere in our consciousness. We're just kind of going Mach 2 with our hair on fire, and we don't have time long enough to stand still and examine, like, why do we not want that? Isn't that a better way to live? We be willing to forfeit that? That's what kind of makes me,
So
like,
there was the best post I saw yesterday, and it really resonated with me. It's like we work our whole lives to make money so we can make ourselves sick, and then
mm,
we lose all of our money making ourselves well just to die. And I thought to myself,
Oh,
well, that's just so
what a
depressing.
dismal, oh my goodness. Yeah.
But it's actually true. Like the statistics are pretty outstanding. It's like 60, we live 60 years of our lives well for 100 years of total days, or 85 days, or 85 years, whatever the number is.
Yeah.
But it's like, so 20%, maybe 20 to 40% of our life is actually lived unwell. So what does that look like? That you're wasting all this energy and time as a result of, you know, historic standards of what some random person decided that this is what we were going to do in 1941 when they broke all the bells to build pharma. I always go back to pharma. And
Yeah.
instead of like living in this beginner's mind where every day is an opportunity to lead, to change, to grow, to try, we just
And
shut
I think
ourselves off.
we do. We don't receive from one by doing that, but it's almost like we don't receive, because then what would that cost me to receive? So in the last year we were in Nazareth, we had this enormous water main break in my house, and the water was coming through the wall and shooting up through the tiles. And my husband was away, and I just said to the neighbor, "Ben's been gone almost 2 weeks, and nothing big happened." And that night, we had this huge water. Okay, now I think of something like that happening in my house right here. I would never have en masse what I had in Nazareth, because what happened in Nazareth was the entire neighborhood. Here's my neighbors in shorts, flip flops, with squeegees, dumping my furniture out, taking the water out, calling the municipality. Of course, someone made coffee, someone else brought food. It was us. We dealt with it. I think we don't even realize, like, we're so used to this that even if we had amnesia about how it could have has been in the past, it's such a distant memory that I don't think we realize just the beauty of what could be if we yielded ourselves more and lent ourselves to one another in that way.
I love that. It's so true. I feel exactly the same. I also have been like deeply digging into relationships and what that looks like too. We in the US expect that our partner is going to be our everything. And in the rest of the world, in places that I've grown up and spent my life with, it's dimensional. You have a human being that happens to sleep next to you most nights. And then you have the whole community who's there to support and guide you and participate in your life. And so you feel like not only less lonely, but especially in Indian households and Latin households, you're actually living with your family and your cousins and your uncle and your brother. And so it creates this framework of network that makes your life better. And I brought this up yesterday on a team call, but I find it really interesting. So I'm just going to share in context of what you're talking about. They were talking about money. And in the US, we think about our family first only. And we just think about how, even I'm not even thinking about my children sometimes when I make a purchase. I'm just making a purchase because I want it. And that idea of I and I want and I desire, that came up at a dinner table conversation where they share a monthly budget as a family.
Mm.
And they have a shared bank account. And then because they all live together, they all share expenses like food and electricity and, college funds for the children. All the things are shared by the resources of the family. And so I said, well, what happens if you want to make a big purchase, like a expensive handbag or a new car? Like, how does that work? And they all have their own bank accounts. She said, but I would want to share in the joy of that purchase with my family. And I would want them to be part of my decision making, because wouldn't that be so much better to be surrounded by love in the purchase and the opportunity that you're making? And as a result, you're making different decisions, right? And they had a what are they called? Arranged marriage. And I asked them if they appreciated the arranged marriage. And they said, of course, how can we possibly make those decisions when we have 15 advisors who are selecting for us? And I was like, oh my God, that is so right on the money. That's why you have no divorce in your country. We're
Yeah,
not
it's
going with
so
feelings.
so different. I mean, I had shared that about, everything is communal, from buying a couch to taking a wife. Like, when we got new furniture coming from, I think, Nablus, they brought us batlawa. Like, we had suites. Like, it was a big purchase. Like, you got a car. Like, everybody was in on it and celebrated with you. It was so much more than just like, I made an individual purchase, I made an individual decision. There is such a collective way of thinking there that everything you're going to do is how is it related, to everyone else that I'm around. It's not just singular. It's not just me. And, like you say, I make a purchase, I make it just for myself. It's just, especially if it's a big purchase, that's not how they did it. And, that's such a radically different way of living. I think it's another dimension of what that means to be in community. How would our lives change if even yield to that a little bit?
So how do we do that? How do we go back to a different mindset around time that actually drives all of these results in the right direction? Because I think we're just missing that, right? Like, what's the task that you have to us to make a shift? How can we do this collectively together?
Well, I think part of it is to acknowledge that the change has to happen, because I think you can't, I think you can't hang white knuckled onto this and expect that we're going to get that. So we've got to loosen our grip a little bit on what we're doing. And I think it's, rather than either or, I think it's a yes and. Yes, we are living with, and we're willing to explore another way of being, living, working. I think just in the work thing alone, and I think for women, I think we've yielded far too much. We've left our femininity out of things. We've left our nurture. We've left the beautiful gifts we bring, that are communal. I think if we even were willing to explore, what would that look like? And I'll tell you, here's what we're banging up against. Who's going to get the credit? Pride, ego, FOMO. Like, these are all the things that we're kind of boxing with in the ring. And if we could get courageous enough and brave enough, call that out for what it is. I'm really struggling, because then who gets the credit for that? And then, okay, put that on the table and kick that around a little bit. Like, I think we need honest conversations to be able to say, the way it is isn't ideal. It's not working. Over here looks too utopian. How do I bridge? That's why I said my life in Nazareth is like this idyllic place of, because we lived in Kairos time. Well, maybe I'm not going to go totally to that, but can I edge my way toward that and get rid of some of this other isolation, Chronos living, having to figure it all out on my own, having to have every answer. It's a lonely ride, and I'm not going to get there. I don't have capacity. I'm only gifted for certain things. So I think it's to begin the dialogue.
Is there a blend of the two together that becomes something else? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, I think you can't. I think because of who we are as a culture, we're still going to have to honor the way we, like, the individual, maybe differently than it would be there. But I think as we are willing to say the yes, and yes, we understand each other's goals and aspirations and dreams. And how can we work to help one another get there? What's that African proverb? If you want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go together. And that's kind of what I'm thinking. We'll go farther if we go together.
Andrew and I have been talking about this a lot, because success is defined. I have a lot of highly educated friends because I work in finance, and a lot of the people that I do not have those degrees as a classification. But what I find super interesting is their definition of success is following that traditional route and achieving, like, call it a managing director level at Goldman Sachs. That to me is like the end of the world as we know it. I would be so bored in that role. It's like formulaic, it's far too disciplined. And so success to me is just very different than the way that they've defined success. And I started thinking through, well, why is that a definition of success? And it's because really the last, call it 60 years, have been relatively stable. And the success that people imagine is really just one white linear path of how people get to their own level of defined success. But it actually, from this point forward, it doesn't work. That success moniker isn't going to work as we go through these major climate events. It didn't work before. It's just been a 60-year stability period that we are blocking and tackling in time to say, this is today the gold standard. So what happens beyond this? What is actually that future of success, and what does that look like? And I would love for us to look at that almost as a round two of this conversation and think through how those two forms of time can actually blend together into the future as we start to think about what this world looks like on the other side of these massive climate events that are going to happen. I mean, it's inevitable. We're 3 years away from all the icebergs being melted. What happens next?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that too, what you're saying in that 6-year linear, where we really prided ourselves in academic achievement, where in essence we need wisdom. You know, we need wisdom. So I think as you have even um, people aging and not just putting them somewhere, how do we tap this wisdom and
Elders.
the elders and bring that back? And I'm seeing that you'll see so many communities that are really trying to have conversations around that and building community around that. But I love what you're saying. I would love to have that conversation because I think I cannot bear that definition of success either. I have a business degree, which has like sat in a drawer forever. I just, it's not that. I mean, I think the prayer of my heart is always for wisdom, for wisdom and discernment. How do I steward what I have well and wisely? Like how will I live in wholehearted alignment? Like, what will I do? That's much more success, not just necessarily the number in your bank account or how many degrees on the wall or whatever, because then that leaves so many people out. It
And
doesn't give them a seat at the table.
I would say that the success metric I've always used is a life of service. And so in fact, the life of success of what we see is the direct opposition of that. It's like how individual can I possibly be? That is, and me at the pinnacle of that ladder at the very, very top. That's me. That is success because I have won. And I want to go back to that collective where it's a life of service where everyone helps each other, where my kids are dimensional creatures, where the life we live is enveloped in love. How can we do that? I'd be so excited to talk about that. And
Yeah,
how do we make an elder out of somebody who doesn't know how to be one? Where we've
right.
actually broken that transition period where they would go from an elder, comfortably because that's part of the lineage. Now we have a 60-year time lapse of what that looks like. How do we get back to elders?
I love it. I love this conversation. I hope we do have a round two of it because I would
Yeah,
love
you have to have
to.
Cassandra here because she's that person. That's outside my
Okay.
wheelhouse. Cassandra Warney is she's really I don't know, our Native American expert. She is rooted in community and systems, and her focus on our team is systems change. I think she
Mm.
would just eat this conversation up.
Oh,
Well, I
that's
mean,
awesome.
simply put, she's a philosopher.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's great.
Way more easy to say.
It is.
You're so brilliant. I am so excited about
Oh,
this conversation. Thank you
I
for
love
being
meeting
here.
you, Rach. Thank you so much for engaging in it. Just like really even um spurring just inspiring me to even think more about these things. And I love it. I hope we can keep the conversation going.
Me too, me too, me too. Andrew, you figured that out.
Oh, we will. Yeah, Donna, thank you again so much. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of yours ever since I first discovered you, and I'm so happy
Thank
to be able to
you.
call you a friend as well. There's been so many things I've learned from you, and even today, my head is spinning. I can't wait to put some thoughts on paper as well. I mean, Rach, you've scratched the surface there of something that we really need to dive into. But thank you so much, Donna. I'm gonna stop the recording now.